So I have someone else who is running for political office who is going to try to make some changes, and she'll tell us all about her platform and who she is and what she represents. And so without further ado, I have the U.S. Senate candidate for New York, Diane Sare. Welcome, Diane. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction. So go ahead. I hope you're going to ask me something, because otherwise I don't know where to start.
Well, I mean, you know, it was a very invigorating conversation that I had with one of the people working on your campaign and activists that are working on your campaign. So let's start with this. Just basically who you are and where, you know, all about, because my audience is from all over the world, actually, not just from, you know, regional. So if you could tell them where you're running, who you're running against, and why, and what drew you to that position. Start with that.
Sure. All right. Well, I am a trained classical musician, grew up in a Quaker household. And when I was a student at New England Conservatory, I ran into the then presidential campaign of Lyndon LaRouche, who had already been indicted by Robert Mueller, who had developed this, what stupidly became known as Star Wars, but the Strategic Defense Initiative, which LaRouche's idea was you develop laser beams that can shoot down nuclear missiles so that you can actually end nuclear war, that you have a defensive technology that supersedes the nuclear technology, and then you have a basis for people to draw down their nuclear warheads, and that the only way this would work is for the US and the Soviet Union to do it simultaneously together. And Reagan liked that idea. He adopted it. LaRouche became his back channel to negotiate with the Soviets. The Soviets rejected it. And they did so because they said, we saw what happened in the United States when you had the Apollo project. For every dollar you spent going to the moon, you got $14 back in microwave ovens and cell phones and, you know, all Teflon and Velcro and all of these things, so that your physical economy massively expanded and became more robust, where the Soviet economy would not do that. They had super advanced investments in military, but then they had farms, you know, tractors from the 1940s. So they overwhelmingly they said, no, we're not going to take Reagan's offer on this. And LaRouche warned them. He said, if you go off on your own and try to develop this technology without the United States, you're going to cannibalize your economy. And I am warning that the Soviet Union will disintegrate within 5 years. And he was the only person, I can assure you, in 1982, 83 that was saying that, and turned out to be completely on the mark, for which, ironically, you know, they had produced a film in the Soviet Union blaming LaRouche and associates for the assassination of Olof Palme, a huge smear campaign calling on the US to arrest LaRouche for his taxes. They didn't love him, I'll put it that way. But when the forecast was vindicated, he really earned the admiration of some of the top Russian intellectuals, and developed actually a wonderful friendship with many, many top Russian scientists and economists, not least of which is one who's extremely prominent today, Sergei Glaziev, who's the head of the Eurasian Economic Union, and who is designing many of the policies, and who just produced a beautiful little film for the centennial of LaRouche's birth, September 8th, where he pointed out the nations that listened to LaRouche, that got their currencies under control, that put physical economy ahead of speculation, that began peaceful relations with other nations, those nations are relatively prospering, whereas the nations, I would say, like the US, that threw him in jail for 5 years and shut down his publications, and it really, in a way, presaged what happened with Julian Assange and others. The nations that took that approach are not doing very well. In fact, they're doing pretty terribly, something that I know President Biden doesn't seem to realize. He thinks we're doing better than everybody else in the world, but that's not actually the truth of the matter. So at any rate, I began organizing there. I ran for office for US Congress in 2012 and 2014 in New Jersey as a Democrat. That was a pretty hilarious campaign because I was campaigning to impeach Barack Obama, which meant that every time I walked into a Democratic Party meeting, people would start screaming and yelling and trying to figure out how to get rid of me. Then I ran as an independent against Chris Christie for governor. And, so I've been active. I also created a large community chorus in New York City after the Staten Island grand jury found that there had been no wrongdoing in the death by strangulation of Eric Garner. And I created the chorus because I realized that you had a game being played to create race riots and to create this incredible animosity between the police, on the one hand, the African American community, and of course in New York City, actually, the police force is not majority Caucasian, actually. But at any rate, so what we didn't want to see is retribution and just crazy violence, but why not? Because justice is not revenge. So I said, we're going to organize a concert dedicated to the sanctity of every human life, that mankind has to get above violence. We can't resolve our conflicts this way. MacArthur was totally right. Once you had the nuclear bombs dropped on Japan, and it was clear to him that humanity, and by the way, he didn't even know about the nuclear bombs. He had done a naval blockade that was totally successful, and Japan was ready to surrender. This was totally unnecessary carnage. He said, mankind is going to have to grow up. We have outpaced ourselves. We are capable of annihilating the entire human species. And he said, I'm not sure culturally we're mature enough to handle that. And he called for a spiritual recrudescence. I think that's so right. And here we are again now, potentially on the brink of nuclear annihilation, because people somehow have not become human enough or matured into their human identity to realize that there are higher principles by which we could actually be united for common goals of mankind without sacrificing our sovereignty, our language, our individuality. A total agreement and conformity is not required to have peaceful prosperity.